Welcome back to another episode where author and trial lawyer Rick Friedman shares his insights and techniques to having success in the courtroom. This video is episode 6 of 6, the final one, which means if you haven't seen the previous episodes, we got to catch you up to speed, so I'll provide links in the description down below, so be sure to check those out. Speaking of which, whenever you do go down in the description, you'll also see links to Rick's books and other resources that are mentioned during this 6-episode series. Now, I want to ask you to do one simple thing. If you find yourself liking this video, then please hit the like button down below. Doing so allows the video to rank higher, reach more people, and ultimately help more people, and that's always the goal. With all that out of the way, let's get back into the interview with Rick Friedman. I hope you enjoy. Okay, so at this point, Rick, let's go through some of the questions that the Law Venture community members had. I incorporated some of the mass questions in what we were talking about so far.
Okay.
And I'm going to refer to this as like the rapid fire questions. So no
Sure.
need to go in like a full on explanation
You
unless
got
you
it.
want to.
All right.
So this first question is coming from Eric. What is the most significant positive change that you experienced in your professional career?
Well, I think we talked about one of them already, which was realizing I'm not that important. I think I'm the center stage of this courtroom drama, but each juror thinks they're the center character in this courtroom drama. And so that was one. And then the next one, which happened decades later, was the case is not life or death.
Yeah.
It's attitude, how I experience the trials. And I'd say those are the two.
Okay. So the next question we have, she wanted to remain anonymous, but was a fan of you. How do you determine whether a case is worth taking to trial when considering expenses and time invested? Does there need to be a lot of upside? Or is that something to where, you defer to the client or anything else?
Well, I think if you have a practice, if a quote trial practice or personal injury practice, you have to take cases to trial if you want any credibility. You're not making your money on the cases that go to trial. Let's say you have 30 cases in your office.
Yeah.
And you take one to trial and you win. All your other cases now have more value. You can bet the insurance companies watch this stuff. They keep score.
Yeah.
So you take that case to trial and you lose. All your other cases still increase in value because they know you're someone willing to take a case to trial. If you're willing to take a case to trial, it means you're willing to put them at risk. They don't like risk. So are you someone they know no matter how incompetent the plaintiff lawyer is, if they're willing to go to trial, they can create risk for the adjuster or the insurance company or whoever's on the other side. So the trial, it's almost always economically smarter to settle a case than to try it.
Yeah.
Almost always. But in terms of that individual case. Now, that question has lots of components to it. One is, if you look only at that case in your own self-interest as a business person, almost never is it the right thing economically to go to trial. But if you look at your practice as a whole, every time you go to trial, you're upping the value of your other cases. And then another component of that question is, well, how do you decide what to tell the client about whether to settle or not?
Exactly.
And I think every conscientious plaintiff lawyer wrestles with that forever.
Yeah.
But what finally I came down to was, and some people cop out by saying, well, that's the client's decision, not mine. But the reality is, for most clients, they're going to follow your advice. And if you say it's your decision, they're going to say, well, what do you think I should do? Or what would you do if you were in my place, or whatever? Because they want your professional advice. And I finally decided, because again, there's no one size fits all, but I started thinking of it in terms of, well, I have all this education, training, and experience, and I know quite a bit about this client. If she were my sister, what would I advise her to do with this $150,000 offer on the table? If he was my brother, if he was my father, my son, what would I advise them to do? That gets me out of the equation as best I can. to give advice that's most in line with what's appropriate for my client. So you could have two identical cases, but one client's very wealthy, and if they win or lose, it's no big deal. And one's homeless, and if you get the $150,000, they can get an apartment and get a place for their 8-year-old kid to live. And so I take all that into account. What would I tell my sister? That's how I deal with it now.
I'm going to add on to that because that was great information. And honestly, it hit deep a little bit because as someone with a small practice, I'm not going to trial as much as I would like. It's been a couple of years since I've been to trial because of that. And the issue that I'm running into isn't so much as I don't want to. I would love to, but I have the conversation with the client, and a lot of my clients, even on that initial phone call, they're afraid of it being a contentious experience, right? They don't want to invest the time.
Right.
And when I tell them the potential upside of going to trial and potential downside, it's just like, yeah, let's just go ahead. I haven't until recently gotten a couple clients that are just like, no, screw it. Like, Jared, whatever we need to do. And you have to have those like screw it clients in order to be like, let's rock and roll. And I'm working this one up right now that is just going to be fun. Like it's going to be a fun one to work up. But when you don't have a lot of volume, it's hard to get those like, diamonds in the rough, so to speak.
Well, I mean, the other piece to that, and there's a chapter about that in Becoming a Trial Lawyer, these days, well, it was true when I started practicing too. If you really want a lot of trial experience, you're going to have to pay for it. And by pay for it, I mean, go to the public defender and ask for conflict, misdemeanor conflict cases that you can try, or find cases with statutory attorney's fees, and bad cases. Take in a bad case because they won't settle. And there is no way to get, I mean, the first murder case I did for a total fee of $3,000, which included my travel expenses, because I wanted to try a murder case. Unless you're in a very fortunate situation, like you're working in a big plaintiff firm and they're grooming you to be a star trial lawyer, which is very rare. If you got your own practice, you have to sort of take on the responsibility of, if I'm going to call myself a trial lawyer, I need to get some trials, and I may lose money doing these trials, but that's part of developing myself into the person and the lawyer I want to be.
And in my situation, I know it's not I will lose money because it's like the time aspect, right? Like,
of course,
working up these big cases that I want to focus on, but also at the same time, like the smaller cases, taking the trial, I'm like, okay, the value there. And you wear a lot of hats as a solo lawyer, right? Like you have to do a lot of things. And when you add the extra deadlines and working up the case, it's like, okay, does this case have enough upside? But like you're saying, it sounds like if you take it to trial, you look at the full landscape. I always tell people on the Law Venture YouTube channel, it's like, look, I take reductions on my fees a lot because I know, or I have faith in my clients turning into walking billboards to be referral sources for me, right? Like I have a video where I reduced by like $1,000 and it ended up resulting in $40,000 in additional attorney's fees from word of mouth referrals.
Sure.
And so I'm kind of hearing the parallel of what you're saying of like, yeah, maybe you lose a little bit of money up front, but if the C rises because you are taking it to trial more often, then that's a win for everyone.
Well, and if you're, doing conflict cases, misdemeanor cases for the public defender, 2 a year, you get 2 trials a year of these, or whatever it is. But ultimately, if you're going to call yourself a trial lawyer, you need to be trying cases.
Exactly.
And there is a tension between, you saw that in the recent book, the tension between business and professional. Are you a business person or a professional person? Do I want a surgeon who is making the most money doing hip replacements, or do I want the guy who's done the most hip replacements? That's a pretty easy call. And so, I mean, there is a very clear, and so as a solo, you have to make money. You've got a family to support and this and that. You have multiple goals, and that you have to make adjustments between those goals. Okay, my my bottom line is going to take a hit because I'm going to spend the next month trying this case that I'm almost certainly going to lose, or that, I'm going to win $100,000, but it doesn't justify the time I spent. So, but I'll have another trial under my belt.
The
And
coolest thing that I've experienced so far is connecting with other small law firms, because the solo lawyers, they want co-counsel, right? And so
yes,
they're like, come on in, I can use the extra
that's,
hands.
that's a new thing. When I started practicing, most trials were solo sports,
Mm,
one person. And now it's a team sport. There's
yeah,
just no way around it. Any sizable case can benefit from having more than one lawyer, and often it'll go down in flames if you don't have more than one lawyer. So
yeah,
yeah, you could that's just sort of sprung up organically as I've watched over maybe the last 10 years. It's way more common now than even 10 or 15 years ago
interesting.
for one solo to joint venture with another solo
Mm-hmm.
and go and get, and there I see around Seattle, there are young lawyers who are sort of confederates almost. They frequently try cases. They have their independent practices,
Yeah.
but they kind of, will you come and second chair or first chair
Mm-hmm.
this case with me? And they trade that back and forth. And it's a great thing. I think it's just sprung up organically. I don't think there's been a plan, but
Yeah.
it's a cool thing. I like watching that.
And my friends know you don't have to pay me anything. I'll go down and
Yeah.
let's knock it out. Like let's do
Right.
it.
Right.
That was great. I know we're trying to do rapid fire questions,
Yeah.
but I loved every second of
All
that.
right. All
This
right.
next question is actually coming from myself because I was sitting in on the webinar that you did, and you teased that you think lay witnesses are a secret weapon. Can you explain that
Oh,
pretty
yeah. I
briefly?
mean, that is the polarizing book.
Okay.
And I'm just going to say, very abbreviated.
Mm-hmm.
We get to those witnesses first if we're doing our job right. The defense doesn't take them seriously. And at trial, those lay witnesses are devastating. And I
Mm-hmm.
kind of started really appreciating that when I was doing small TBI cases, mild traumatic brain injury cases. And I would see, and the jurors would often say afterwards, well, we figured both experts kind of canceled each other out, but the lay witnesses convinced us something really bad had happened to her brain.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I give 3-hour, 8-hour talks on why lay witnesses are the
Uh-huh.
secret weapon, but we get first access to them. They're very, very powerful.
Yeah.
The defense is helpless in the face of a good lay witness, just totally helpless. And so that's the short answer to that. And
Okay.
if people want the longer answer, it's in the polarizing book.
Love it. And I'm going to provide links down for everyone in the description. So be sure to check out those books. Question coming from Jimmy: how do you persuade jurors on a case with only non-economic damages? And what I've seen recently is, okay, you have a case where health insurance has been factored in. And as a result, the actual paid and incurred, at least in the state of Texas, is maybe like 20,000 when the hospital bills were originally 300,000, and you can only introduce the 20,000. So the fear is the 20K is going to anchor down
Oh
the
yeah.
jury.
No, I get rid of those. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the non-economic, it varies, but it's finding the moral core of the case,
Mm-hmm.
and there is, I hate to keep turning this into an infomercial for my books, but
No,
you're wanting
no,
me to
do it.
answer quickly. That Trial Guides has something called Moral Core Advocacy. It's a
Mm-hmm.
DVD presentation that I did that talks about that very issue of sort of finding the more, and polarizing is about that too, of
Mm-hmm.
how do you develop the moral energy to make someone want to give money for this harm that occurred. And it's really, there isn't a formula except, but I'll give one example: personal responsibility. One line of argument is, and this argument actually is in the polarizing book too, in a
Mm-hmm.
longer version, but basically in our culture, we have always had a very strong belief that personal responsibility is important, that people take responsibility for what they do. You may see in the gift stores in Austin, Texas, a little sign that says, pretty to look at, delightful to hold, but if you should break it, consider it sold.
Hmm.
That's reflecting the view that you break something, you pay for it. And that's that can influence non-economic damages tremendously. That's a conservative value. And many of the values plaintiff lawyers are espousing are conservative values.
Hmm.
And we've gotten so polarized, we're afraid to kind of embrace our inner conservative. But I think we all have that in us. And it's a big part of our advocacy. And again, more of that is in great detail laid out in Polarizing and in that DVD. And let me just say, anyone who goes to Trial Guides and types in under promotional code RFCLE for Rick Friedman CLE gets 10% off of any of these products automatically. So just
Fantastic. Yeah,
throwing that
no,
out there. Yeah.
thank you. And we haven't even talked about Rules of the Road, which we don't need to get
Yeah.
into, but I
No.
highly recommend everyone to get that. That was the first book I purchased that you authored.
Yeah.
And my dad thought he was hot stuff and he was like, give me a cross examination. Like, and I implemented the strategies. He was like, oh, that was pretty good. And so that right there, it
That's
was
good.
worth the money for that moment right there.
Is he a
Um,
lawyer?
he's not. So
Ah,
he's a chemical engineer that's pretty high up on he basically handles the safety for this chemical company that's
perfect for Rules of the Road. Perfect.
totally, totally. So
Yeah.
he's been deposed a number of times, and he was trying to rely on the, I don't know, I don't know, I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And I mean, the Rules of the Road chapter that I was using on him was incredible.
That's
Um,
great.
Next question coming from Christine. For future lawyers, do you have any advice on undergrad majors to choose or law schools to pick? And I think by the law schools to pick, like a specific culture. I know some law schools they specialize more in trial work, and others are maybe briefing work.
Yeah. I mean, if somebody wants to, I would just say for undergraduate, go towards what excites you. I know some great lawyers who were English literature undergrad
Hmm.
degrees and others who are chemistry majors. And the great thing about law is anything you learn about anything anywhere is probably going to be relevant. So I
Hmm.
would just say go to what excites you, that really turns you on. And in terms of law schools, I don't think it matters a whole lot where you go, to be honest. I think paying attention, looking for opportunities to stand up and talk in front of people. Um, all the curriculum are basically the same. I mean, the law school people would hate for me to say that. I mean, obviously, there are professors in certain schools that if
Yeah.
you know someone and you're attracted to them, you should go. But yeah, I don't think it makes that much difference.
And this question is coming from Lauren. What is your best advice for newly licensed lawyers?
Just search out every opportunity you can to be in a courtroom, arguing, talking, presenting, and then reading everything you can about the human condition, what makes people tick. Because this job is about our humanity more than anything else. And it gets distorted and corrupted, but at its best, it's about being as fully human as you possibly can be.
I love it. I love it. Rick, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I know the law venture community is going to appreciate it. And we hope to have you back. It's
All
been an
right.
absolute
Well,
pleasure.
well, I had a blast. It was really fun, Jarrett. So invite me anytime.
Thank you so much.
All right. Bye bye.